Hello, my name is Wills Elliman. I'm with Newmark Grubb Knight Frank. Today we're having a conversation with Bryan Tracy. He's the head of White Dog Labs and DESCA, the Delaware Sustainable Chemistry Alliance.
So the first company I started was back in 2009, and that was out of my PhD studies out of the University of Delaware and Northwestern University. And it was founded on the concept of creating new technologies, bio-based technologies, to create sustainable chemicals and ideally sustainable fuels. So we were creating, actually, to some extent, playing God on bacteria, making new bacteria to do fancy beer fermentations. Those fancy beer fermentations would make the exact same products that the petrochemical industry makes. Elkerton was fortunate to be able to license its earlier stage technologies into China, as China was actually taking one of the lead positions in making chemicals through these new approaches and not having necessarily the incumbent technology to compete against. And then subsequently we expanded our business as well into Europe, largely into Germany, working with several major chemical companies there. As instead of just using sugars, which our technology uses sugars, we also started using waste gases. So we could take the off gas from a steel mill production facility or even from electricity generation facility off of a natural gas burning electricity generation facility and consume that with our microorganisms. And along the way, Elkerton became sort of a lifestyle business, answering the needs of big companies from contract services and so forth, and then licensing technologies here and there. And we attracted the attention then of some investors out of Silicon Valley, a group called Musea Ventures, which is actually the family wealth of the Somek family, in particular SAS Somek, who I'll describe in just a little bit. But through that, we actually co-founded a second company called White Dog Labs. And White Dog Labs was looking at a distinctly different technology of, we had the microorganisms to actually produce biochemicals through fancy fermentations. But there's another big challenge of how do I pull those biochemicals out of the fermentation broths, out of that liquid solution itself in an efficient fashion. So White Dog created several technologies in that space. And then eventually White Dog had a bigger appetite and subsequently acquired Elkerton back in 2014. And the merging of the two technologies now has given rise to the focus of White Dog to create full technology packages to convert sugars and gases and agricultural wastes and so forth into commodity scale chemical, specialty chemical, and also protein for animal feed to help feed the rest of the world. White Dog has a technology that we call Mixotherm. So in the world of biochemicals, it's called bio because most often your input to the process is a biological input, like sugar from corn or waste sugar from switchgrass or something of that sort. That input is very different from oil, and yet you want to make the exact same products that you're making from oil. So we would argue that that input of sugar is quite incompatible to make the same oil products. Meantime, you can add natural gas, for example, into our fermentation process to simultaneously consume these energy-rich gases with sugars. So we mix the best of both worlds. We mixotherm fossil inputs and bio inputs together to give the most cost-effective outputs and very sustainable outputs to produce chemicals. And you have to have the understanding that sustainability has three pillars. It's not just being more environmentally friendly and being more socially friendly, but it also has to be economically competitive. So that's where we are able to mix the best of all those worlds and meet good economics to compete with fossil-based products. Particularly given the fact that oil these days, we believe long-term is going to be relatively low price, around $50 a barrel. So we have to be able to compete on those economics. And Mixotherm allows us to do that. Where do customers derive value from our technology is really two places. The first one is competition on the economics. Now, since we are able to use multiple feedstocks, we actually suggest, and we show economically, that we can hedge variations in maybe one day your sugar cost is more expensive versus your natural gas cost is cheaper, and vice versa. So if you're using both and you're not simply dependent upon one of them, we're able to hedge the economics of the process. So that's value to our customers and the consumers of our products. Subsequently, as well, or in addition to that, we still have a large bio component going into our product. And that bio component has a significantly reduced CO2 footprint associated with it. So we are reducing the amount of greenhouse gas emissions through the production of the process. Now, there's been lots of controversy or frustration with this. There aren't many who pay premiums for green products. However, if your building's LEED certified, or if you can claim a large bio content in paints or in your consumer products, the plant bottle, for example, that saved Dasani water. Dasani water was losing tremendous amount of market share, and it recaptured this market share because now it's making the plant-based bottle. You don't pay any more for that bottle, but it's the tiebreaker. If something's more sustainable, it's the tiebreaker versus the less sustainable product if you can compete on economics. So that's the other part of the value that we bring to our customers, is a reduced CO2 emissions footprint and a bio component to it for when they make their consumer product, such as our first product is acetone. And when we make the acetone, that acetone is subsequently used for the production of artificial glass, methyl methacrylate or plexiglass. So now that plexiglass is more sustainable, and our customers get the value of that. So Sass and his son Tally created their venture fund called Musea Ventures with the drive to do both good and well. They ideally want to do well financially with their investments, while at the same time doing good for society. It's a family office, so they have the ability to see a longer term through their investment and to take different risks than just a traditional venture capital fund would, or traditional VC fund would do. Sass Somek himself was an incredibly successful semiconductor executive. He was one of 3 gentlemen that really revamped the product lines for a company called Applied Materials back in the 80s. And that eventually led to Applied Materials transitioning from being about a $50 million a year company to a multi-billion-dollar company. And because they became the dominant producer of equipment to make semiconductor chips. And in fact, one of the product lines that Sass is most proud of, rightly so, still is a part of the process to make every single semiconductor chip today, every single one. And that piece of equipment is in the permanent collection in the Smithsonian. So he was fortunate enough to ride a very successful financial wave as well in the semiconductor industry. For that, he's in the Silicon Valley Hall of Fame. He's won one of the Semi Lifetime Achievement Awards. A very illustrious career. Now, he retired from the semiconductor industry back in 2008, and with his son Tally, they started placing small investments into companies that, again, do both good and well. They've mixed up their portfolio, but White Dog Labs is actually their largest investment to date, to the tune of nearly $10 million has been invested into White Dog Labs, because we're a technology that really has the potential to be financially very successful, even with just our first plant. But at the same time, it will be a disruptive technology that changes the perspective on how you can make fuels, chemicals, specialty products, and protein to feed the world. And Sass is the executive chairman of our company, very, very involved in the company. He's been a very significant mentor to me personally. So he and I get to travel the world, interacting with clients as we build the company and as we look for financing for our first plant. And that's the stage, by the way, where we are with our company, is hoping to close on the financing for our first bioacetone plant, which we would like to construct and have operating in the year 2020. So White Dog Labs' major commercial aspiration right now, our first is a 75,000 ton per year bioacetone plant. That's 25 million gallons. And we're looking to site that either in South Dakota or Minnesota. The reason being, we would consume upwards of 10 million bushels of corn per year. So we need to be somewhere where corn is available and corn is affordable. That plant, we are looking to finance it. We're actually in the Part 2 submission process for a DOE loan. And this is the Department of Energy. The Department of Energy actually has about $5 billion set aside for loans, up to 75% loans at low interest rates, to build such renewable biochemical, and renewable plants. We have to obviously raise the rest of the 25% of the financing for the plant. We intend on doing that in terms of equity as opposed to debt. And that's a 10-year payback period to the DOE. So your economics have to be sufficient to justify that, to have a high enough debt service to coverage ratio. And for us, we're in the process right now of concluding on our demonstration to show enough runtime at sufficiently large scale to provide the DOE with enough comfort to say, yes, the technology will be able to get to full production scale and will not be a potential black eye on the DOE for making a commitment to such a plant. First of all, I started my first company, Elkerton, out of essentially finishing up my PhD studies at University of Delaware. So that's where we got our roots, but we have not left because the human capital in the chemical industry and in the materials industry is second to none in the Delaware region compared to anywhere else in the world. In fact, 30% of the chemical industry is employed in about a 100-mile radius of Wilmington, Delaware. And we're talking, it rivals that of Houston and Chicago. So getting access to industry knowledge for connections to decision makers within large companies, to get assistance on IP strategy, to get assistance on technology development and so forth, it's literally maybe a neighborhood away from you in Delaware to find a world-class expert in that space. And it's unfortunate, the current Dow-DuPont merger has released a tremendous amount of DuPont workforce back into the open market, which is probably one of those natural life cycles of companies growing and seeing their twilight and so forth. But for us, we've been able to access that recently left DuPont talent to assist us. And for us, that saved us tremendous amounts of money on navigating the technology and the business landscape for our products that we explore. And additionally, the cost of living, the cost of business, particularly in Delaware, is very, very good. I make a joke about it, but we have had no challenge in attracting young, thirsty, bright-eyed, for example, PhD scientists out of the Bay Area, out of San Francisco area, or Boston, or San Diego, because as they lay down their roots and want to have families and so forth, for them, $2,700 a month in Mountain View, California, when you're competing against Google engineers, gets you a one-bedroom apartment. In Delaware, you can get a starter castle down in Middleton, Delaware, and plant your roots and be able to support your family with no challenges whatsoever on the same types of salaries that we pay them. So that's the advantages of Delaware. And lastly, in terms of Delaware, it has a world-class research institute, that being University of Delaware, that is actually a pretty untapped resource to date. They're not well known for technology transfer and for developing entrepreneurial sort of students and so forth. So we are at the forefront of taking advantage of that capability and cultivating that and being a part of that ecosystem. White Dog Lab in 5 years has probably got one of two fates. The first one is on the backside of a successful acetone plant. We hope that the IPO markets for our types of companies improve. And so subsequent plants will be financed through a successful initial public offering as we go public. Or particularly if a couple of our other products that we're working on, namely protein-based products, they are very ripe for a strategic acquisition. So I think it's very likely that we will be in the later terms of a joint development relationship with a major corn processor, for example, or ethanol producer or chemical company en route to an acquisition of the company. So we have plenty of time to get there, 5 years to get there and so forth, many challenges to overcome. But we see the future for White Dog being very, very bright with the diversity of products that we have, the competitive advantages that we have with our technology, and the sheer fact that we are addressing not just real critical needs within the world and our society, but ones in which we are creating tremendous value in the markets. So our customers capitalize and profit off of what we're able to develop. how well can our technology disrupt the protein industry to make food for mankind? And that's a real critical issue that we have coming up. It's a fact. We're en route to being a population of 9 billion people by 2050. Now, that's a scary number, but the more significant number is the fact that we will at least double, potentially triple the amount of first world population by 2050 as well. And that's the consuming population. So that's the population that's no longer going to be largely just plant-based protein consuming and so forth. Rather, they're going to start eating more beef, more poultry, more fish, and more pork. But from a perspective of a cultural perspective, there's no hesitation to eat fish and poultry. So the aquaculture industry, in fact, now on a mass basis of food production, protein being produced, meat being produced from the aquaculture industry, outweighs the beef industry in the world right now. Also, though, unfortunately, fish, for the large part, only eat other fish. So if you want to supplement their diet, well, we have to supplement their diet. Otherwise, we will outfish the ocean of sardines and of bait fish. So we have to create another solution to feed these fish that's not going to jeopardize the health of our oceans. So for us, we have a unique opportunity to create a bacteria protein, what we call single cell protein, in order to create a new protein source that the fish find very palatable, that they'll eat and they'll grow off of. And that is a market that's growing in leaps and bounds, and one in which cannot be addressed by any fossil fuel-based technology. Outside of White Dog Labs and El Creton in the past, there's two causes that I'm very passionate about. The first is to assist other entrepreneurs, particularly in this space, because it's a space that I know relatively well, to take the risk to create their own companies and to make new technologies that can change the face of the world. So with that, I serve as the board chair of an organization called the Delaware Sustainable Chemistry Alliance. It's a mouthful. We call ourselves DESCA for short. And it's essentially tapped into what I like to call the domain expertise or the brain trust in the chemical and material industry that our region has, to connect them and to get that very venerable, experienced brain trust, that's a nice way of saying early retirees or retirees, to interact with the younger entrepreneurs to sharpen their understanding of the market and the technology applications so they refine their technology to something that's got a nearer term commercial win. And so DESCA does exactly that. We create venues and opportunities for entrepreneurs and the domain experts to interact to create new, young, early stage companies in these types of spaces. I'm very proud of that organization, and we're doing a great job so far, and I hope to see 5 or 6 new White Dog Lab type of companies in the next 3 or 4 years in Delaware because of that. Secondly, I'm incredibly committed to STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I'm very fortunate to be the board chair of an organization called FAME. That's the Forum to Advance Minorities in Engineering. And that is an organization over the past 40 years. We'll have our 40th year anniversary this year. We provide up to 270 hours per year of outside school curriculum in science and engineering and mathematics to women, to African Americans, to Latinos, to underrepresented populations in STEM disciplines. And we serve a core population of about 270 students per year. And we've expanded our program to what we call stimulated change, where now we are serving a higher needs population. Students who are from communities that don't get the resources that I grew up with. And so from 4th to 7th grade, we provide them about 50 to 70 hours of outside school curriculum to get them exposed to STEM education through a really unique process. But that program alone, in a state the size of Delaware, we were able to impact 1,500 students with a very efficient, small nonprofit organization called FAME that collaborates with a number of others. Because for me personally, growing up in a family, middle class type of family, Army brat, I was afforded plenty of opportunity to go to good schools and to try to reach my full talent and full development and capability. But there's such a huge population out there that's not given that. And from a strange engineering perspective, I look at it also of, as a society and as a country, we are not tapping into the potential of at least 50% of our population. That's minorities and women in terms of the STEM discipline. How great could we be as a society if we tap into that additional 50% and allow them to reach their full potential? So taking away demographics and those types of stories, just from that perspective of benefiting all of our society and making, the cliche statement today, making America greater, I think activities such as FAME is going to be some of the greatest lasting impact that I think I can personally have. So when I'm not working, I used to do a lot of running, but then I became a dad. And so I actually spend the majority of my time now trying to get out in the jogger with my daughter. But my wife and I, we try to stay active, hiking around and doing our nonprofit activities within inside of the community. We also get on the Chesapeake Bay quite a bit. We have a boat that we like to essentially unplug from the rest of society and get out into deeper waters and just ignore everything. So we do that as much as we possibly can, and we have about a month and a half left until we have to button it up for the season. So our challenges have always been, we're competing against the world's biggest commodities. How do we succeed in that world? And you have to make sure you have a differentiated technology that brings value to the consumer, so they're not paying for it based upon some governmental incentive or some false advertising. So that's challenge number one that we've had to, and we continue to struggle with. Second one is getting access to decision makers in 50 to 70,000 person companies. There's not a magical telephone that you call up and say, hey, this is the greatest opportunity in the world, jump on this and let's do this. You have to navigate tremendous bureaucracy or hierarchy and so forth. And that's where we failed miserably earlier on, but subsequently through Desca, we've been able to make the right connections and get much better at that. As an entrepreneur, you get to evaluate yourself frequently. My strengths is I'm pretty flexible and I can improvise and ad hoc and pivot pretty well. So, and as a small company, you're constantly doing that. My weaknesses is I can be kind of headstrong. So particularly, we started hiring more experienced individuals in specific spaces that have a tremendous amount of experience compared to me in, let's say, specific technology. So being able to give them the leeway and say, I fully trust you, or having a different, new type of relationship whereby I listen fully to them. That's been a weakness that I've struggled with. Opportunities for me individually, more expansion of the company. We are sitting on a platform technology that can do quite a few things. So the opportunity for us, or for me individually, is to actually start more companies and expand into new spaces. Threats for the company, we have a lot. The biggest threat for the company is, again, oil going down to $30 a barrel. That's makes everything more challenging. We are a unique company where we can compete at $50 a barrel oil. But with the recent dynamics in OPEC and all the advancements in fracking technology, it essentially came to a point where OPEC has taken their stand. They will not be the swing producer. The U.S. is now the swing producer. So the question is, how much does it cost to produce oil in the U.S.? And if fracking technology gets much, much better, that could bring now the cost of oil truly down to, again, $35 a barrel. That's a big threat to us if we only tag ourselves to petroleum-based products, which is why we go into proteins, because there is no competition from oil for proteins. Additional threats, we actually do not live and die by government incentives. In fact, we would shy away from anything where government incentive is needed because it's an artificial market, and we would much rather compete in an open, free market. Those really, it's the cost of oil that's the real big challenge. So the Dow-DuPont merger, more than just releasing individuals to provide a lot more human capital into the space, other dynamics that are going to occur, other opportunities that are going to occur, which I hope occur, are we would like for more early stage companies to be created in our region. It just builds the community bigger and bigger and bigger, which brings in more capital, more human capital and more focus on our region to say, hey, it's an exciting area and it changes the ecosystem as a whole. And we're at the forefront of that. So we would like to see more of that. And there's going to be more opportunity like that. However, at the same time, that Dow-DuPont merger, particularly for Delaware, and I do have a penchant and an interest in Delaware. I do care about the community significantly. DuPont has been the innovation hub for the entire state of Delaware, period, for the past 120 years. It has been the innovation center. The merger of the two companies essentially is reducing inefficiencies in research and development. Big companies no longer own research and development. Pharma has done this a long time ago, moving away from this. Chemical companies doing it right now. Reason being, their investment into a small business is 5 times more efficient than into their own internal R&D, where the incentives are completely different. There's bureaucracy, and there's a lot more challenges to getting effective research done. So big companies do not own it. They're putting that money out into small businesses instead. In the past, DuPont, if they had a technology internal that they were not interested in cultivating because it addressed only a $50 million market, or it was too far away from their core business, an entrepreneurial employee could take a license to the technology, step out of the company, and go after it for themselves. And you can draw a direct line to probably 70% of all of the enterprise businesses in Delaware over the past 70 to 100 years, one direct line to how they're connected to DuPont. Either it was direct technology taken out of DuPont, or DuPont was their first biggest customer that allowed them to survive in the first place. That's gone. I mean, I don't mean to paint a really sobering picture, but that innovation center is gone from Delaware. There's a huge vacuum, and I don't know what fills it quite yet. And that's going to be a big challenge for the state of Delaware moving forward, is how do we fill that, and how do we continue with the legacy successes and innovation that came out of DuPont in the past. And the innovation spans incredible lengths. Cephalon came out of DuPont. Endo Pharmaceuticals came out of DuPont. W.L. Gore came out of DuPont. U.S. Airways came out of DuPont. That was Allegheny Airlines. That was essentially to service flights from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia for DuPont employees. So, I mean, the tremendous amount of impact and economic influence and just broad in-plan sort of economic growth that had, I really fear is a thing of the past. I oftentimes get asked the question, what is White Dog? Where does that name come from? And it leads to a lot of confusion. We are not a designer puppy mill, thank goodness. But rather, White Dog, its name gets its genesis from the fact that that's virgin distillates from corn grain alcohol before you cask it to make bourbon and whiskey. So our company creates new technologies to essentially create new alcohols. And some of our founders of the company have a certain affinity for bourbons and whiskeys. So we decided, why not name the company White Dog? So we're now White Dog Labs, and maybe down the road we'll also dabble into the actual human consuming spirits. We shall see. But in the meantime, I do not suggest humans consuming our products directly.